Huh.
What is up, everyone? Welcome to the F6P NFL DFS Kickoff Show. Joe Matz, you do not see on screen because his dog was so jacked about tonight's episode. He was just squeaking up a storm. But we're here to discuss the divisional round of the playoffs. And what I love about DFS is we're still rolling. Fantasy is long gone, but DFS just keeps right on trucking. Last week, what was it in Get Smart? Missed it by that much. That's what I felt like because we were all over the right games. We were completely right about loading up Packers, Cowboys, Rams, Lions. It's just I was off Puka. I know you kept trying to warn me, like, what about Puka when I kept saying cup. But the bigger axe I have is with Romeo Doubs, who was the only freaking Packer I did not suggest last week at the wide receiver position. I think I literally suggested every other wide receiver they had. He had a monster game. But we were discussing just before we came on the air, really tough slate. Like DraftKings has done a number this week with their pricing. I was talking about the core I was trying to fit into one lineup with CMC, Collins, St. Brown, Evans, and it is literally impossible. Like I tried for almost an hour a day. It's not going to happen, but we're going to do the same thing that we did last week on this show, where we're going to go through the four major positions: QB, running back, wide receiver, tight end, and we've ranked them 1 through 5. Now, obviously, we are including their price. That's got a little bit to do with why probably some of my place people are like, really? You got them 1 or 2? But you can't have all expensive guys.
Sadly.
So, no, you can't. So, let's just get right into it. Be sure to subscribe to Fantasy Six Pack. Be sure to check out all the great work over at fantasy6pack.net. And be sure to give both me and Joe a follow on Twitter. You can see our Twitter handles just below our beautiful faces. I am actually giving away right now some free stuff. Just hit 2,000 followers. You have the chance to win an Aaron Rodgers jersey, JJ Watt jersey, some autograph cards. All you have to do is like that post, be following me, and then tomorrow night we're going to draw some winners. I actually think I may let Joe draw one of the winners when we get together tomorrow night. But let's get right into the QBs. And I cannot believe this is where we're at. That I have Baker Mayfield number 1 at 6K. I know it's insane. We got Mahomes, Lamar, Allen, like all these options. But at the end of the day, the price does matter. And that's what it is. Baker is 6K. That is the cheapest starting QB in this slate. And he is playing a Detroit defense that is real bad versus QBs and the pass. Since their bye in week 9, 8 of 10 QBs facing the Detroit Lions have scored at least 23.5 points on DraftKings. 9 of 10 have scored 18.5 points or more. They're averaging almost 24 points per game, 23.62 over that 10-game stretch. Some of the QBs they face in that time: Nick Mullins twice, Russell Wilson, Derek Carr. So it's not like a murderer's row. They have played Fields twice and Dak. There's some good ones. And then Baker, man, is he playing really well. 300 plus yards, 3 of 5 games, 19 points or more on DK and 9 of his last 12, 19.8 points or more in 5 of his last 6, multiple passing touchdowns in 5 of his last 6, 13 touchdowns in that 6-game stretch. And that was with the Carolina stinker where he had 0 touchdowns, which is why me and you were not all in on him last week. Was the last time we saw him in Carolina, he looked very injured. There was a lower body injury. It didn't look like he was anywhere near 100%. And then he was slinging it versus the Eagles on Monday night. It was the best I've seen Baker look throwing the football in quite some time. And I just feel like this Detroit secondary, you can get after them And what I love about them, it's the same reason I was all over Stafford last week, is they're so good against the run. It's really difficult to run against this team, and that just forces you to pass. And, oh, by the way, they got a prolific offense, meaning they score points. So, again, you're forced to throw. And I just think if Baker ends up throwing 30, 40 times, good things are happening. We're looking for 3 times his salary and cash gains, which is what we recommend, single entries, double ups, etc. I think Baker's the best option at $6K. Am I insane?
Oh, absolutely not. I mean, last week he was the cheapest option, and if not for our concerns about his health, which, again, looked awful against Carolina, the whole offense did. I mean, I guess I should say the whole team. The defense looked fine against Carolina, as most teams do. But yeah, he couldn't move well. The rib injury was one thing; it was the ankle injury that had me super concerned. And then I had the first or second drive against Philadelphia. There he is, doing a 6-yard scramble, and I'm just like, well, shit.
we missed it.
Because you knew right away. You were like, oh, Baker's fine. This defense is cratering, as any defense coached by Matt Patricia inevitably will.
Touche.
And yeah, no surprise. I mean, if it's healthy Baker going into last week, even with the Carolina game being as bad as it was, if it was just like that was an off game, he's healthy. He might have been my number one last week. He would have been top 3 for sure.
For sure, yeah, I'm with you there.
And now is Detroit as exciting of a matchup for the opposing QB as Philadelphia became this season? No, because I'm not sure, give or take Washington, I'm not sure anyone was at the end. But when you're looking at this slate, and obviously the deeper we get into the playoffs, the harder it is to find plus matchups because most of the defenses are pretty good. Detroit's one of the weaker defenses. I mean, they're also, a bonus is their ADOT this year was 30th. So they see a lot of deep passes. Their DVOA ranking on deep passes this year was 24th. So you got a bottom 10 defense against deep passes that faces the 3rd highest ADOT in the league. You got Mike Evans to throw to, who obviously, not a big week last week. I mean, you brought this up when we were talking the other day. The one upside to us not picking Baker was, unless you're throwing Trey Palmer, or I guess, Kate Otten did do well for me in the lineup I put him in. But if you went Mike Evans or Chris Godwin, you weren't getting a lot out of last week. And Mike Evans, I think, is in a very good spot to bounce back this week.
Oh, bounce back's coming for sure. Oh, yeah. And
I still think there's a very reasonable argument to me made for Chris Godwin as well. So, yeah, if I'm looking at his top wide receivers, I'm going, hey, I think both of them have very good odds of having solid weeks this week. And it's also, like you said, Detroit scores points, especially when they're at home. So I do think there's some reason, we'll get into it, I guess, down the road here, to potentially be worried about Detroit's offense a little bit. But either way, I'm with you on this 100%. I think
so. You do have the lowest thing.
I also have him 1. And it's not just the price, because really, when you break these quarterbacks down price wise, Lamar and Josh Allen are in their own tier, and then everyone else is not too far apart.
Yep.
Now, obviously, the $800 or whatever can make a big difference in who you fit into your lineup. But I mean, for me, straight up, I think Baker would probably be in the middle of the pack for me this week. And the fact that he's the lowest priced, that's enough. Like, he's number 1.
Also, the only dome game, which makes me feel even better.
Also a very good point.
Who do you have number 2 at the QB?
I have Brock Purdy number 2.
Ooh, so see, this is where I'm already worried because I don't even have him on my list. Let me hear the explanation for Brock.
I mean, again, for me, you're just trying to find those matchups that you see a lot of points happening. And I feel very good about, as good as you can for an offense facing San Francisco's defense, based on the fact that Green Bay just lit up another very good defense, though I think San Francisco against better teams is on a higher end than Dallas is. So I do think Green Bay will score points, which is always a bonus when you have the opposing quarterback, because you don't want the offense to just go into a run the clock out shell. And Green Bay's defense, I know they looked good for the portions of the game that mattered last week, because Dallas scores 32, but you're down 27-0. Most of the game is garbage time unless you're the Chargers last year. So, props to a defense that I shit on a lot last week when I was going all in on CeeDee Lamb and I put Dak in my 5. But season on the whole, this is the worst. This is the worst defense that is left.
Yep.
And it's that easy for me. I mean, we just talked about how Baker was on a roll prior to that Carolina game. But what was one of those games? It was Green Bay, his best game of the entire season, 22 of 28 for 381 yards and 4 touchdowns. So, and that's week 15. So as much as, Green Bay looked great last week, very recently they got absolutely torched by another guy in these playoffs. And all due respect
Dallas
to Baker,
is going to Dallas, right? So maybe we
Dallas,
should throw a lot of that out the window.
Yeah. So, and all due respect to Baker, who again playing really well for most of the season, especially down the stretch when Tampa Bay has needed it to get into the playoffs. He's obviously not playing at the level Brock Purdy's been playing at. Who, for all the, I was someone who also was, dousing trying to pour some water on the flames of the Brock Purdy's the MVP stuff, because I thought that was a little ridiculous. But the fact that Brock Purdy was in the conversation was because he threw 31 touchdowns. He was averaging the historically high yards per attempt. And he looked awful against Baltimore because Baltimore is the best defense in the league. Now he's facing a bottom 10 defense. And
just don't forget, 2 of those picks were tips. So, I know that it's easy.
Yeah, and they moved the ball early against Baltimore. Yep. Yeah. So, again, most of these defenses are, at minimum, pretty good defenses. And I still, despite last week, maybe it'll prove me wrong again. I just don't see that with Green Bay's defense. So, and it's Kyle Shanahan. So, anytime you get Kyle, and he's done. Obviously, we've seen him before beat Green Bay by throwing 9 passes with Jimmy Garoppolo. So there is danger here because Green Bay is also still not good against the run.
That was a miserable weather game, though, if we remember. That was really cold at Green Bay.
So, Green Bay is 26th in DVOA against the pass.
Wow.
And the only other defense that's outside the top 20 is Houston. So, for me, it's got to be Brock Purdy, especially because, price range, again, those top 2, Allen and Lamar Jackson, are 1,000 ahead of everyone else. Brock Purdy's 6,500. He's in the mid-tier with him and Stroud are the 2 median guys in this lineup this week. And again, Stroud's playing the best defense in the league, especially, I would say, against the pass. Granted, just lit up Cleveland, who I would say was the second best defense. Well, Brock Purdy gets a bottom 10. So, I don't agree with Stroud being priced higher than Brock Purdy personally. So I like Purdy a lot.
Yeah, now I feel dumb for not having him on my list. We'll go through why, but I went with the most expensive guy on the slate second, which I know seems insane, but I think Josh Allen is the safest bet this weekend. Maybe CMC is right there with him.
Yeah.
10 touchdowns his last 4 games, 22.2 points or more on DK. The big thing, though, is just going back and looking at this dude's playoff resume. It's pretty incredible. So 2021, his first game, 308 yards passing, 66 yards rushing, 5 touchdowns. His second game, which he lost, 329 yards passing, 69 yards rushing, 4 touchdowns. 2022, he comes out with a 352-yard passing game, 20 rushing yards, 2 touchdowns. Follows that up with the worst game by far of his playoffs, 264, 28 rushing, a touchdown. And then last week, I told you I did a fantasy league, which props to JJ Schultz from Fantasy Six Pack for doing this, where we start with 12 people. You draft a quarterback, a running back, 2 wide receivers, a flex, and then a tight end, and then 2 flexes. I literally advanced because only the top 6 advanced the second week because of Josh Allen. He scored like 41 points with the ruling. Last week, he had 203 passing, 74 rushing, 4 touchdowns. I think this is like the Josh Allen statement game. And I know we shouldn't really use narratives when it comes to DFS. I understand that. I'm as big of a data guy as the next. But I just think Josh Allen, the Bills have been waiting to get this Chiefs team at home for 3 years in this spot. And they have. And Buffalo is so good at home. And I just think Josh Allen's going to put on a show. And it's also just how much he's been running lately is the other reason why I think he's really safe. And the other thing I love about him is you can stack him, double stack him with 2 very cheap options because it looks like Gabe Davis is going to be out. So you could play Shakir and Kincaid, go away from Diggs, and have basically his number 2 and number 3 target. And that kind of offsets the price of $8K if, like me, you think Allen is going to have a big game. Again, I'm probably going to lean to Baker being the QB in most of my, cash lineups. We're going to get into Chad, the running backs. The Bills, they confused me last week, the running back. We'll talk about that in a minute. But I just think that, again, this is Allen's game. He's going to show out. And I think that makes him worth the risk at 8K, especially with the fact that you can stack or double stack them, whichever you prefer, with Shakir and Kincaid.
I mean, the thing with Allen, too, is just, it's the rushing. I mean, he plays Kansas City back in week 14. Super inefficient game. 23 of 42, 233 yards, touchdown and pick. If that's all you're getting, you would have been super disappointed that week. But then he adds 32 yards and a touchdown on the ground. Yep. And, I mean, we just saw what he can do if you give him a lane this week against Pittsburgh, where, boom, he's gone 50-plus yards. It's a score. And, I mean, if you get that, you're guaranteed 20 points with Josh Allen.
Yeah, and again, 16 touchdowns in his 5 career playoff games. Yeah.
I mean, for all
is he on your list at all?
He is number 4.
Okay.
And for me personally, I think there was a clear tier for me, which obviously I love that we disagreed about Purdy. Because, for me, it's Mayfield, Purdy, 1-2. And then it's kind of like there's a bit of muck where I could go, a bunch of different directions. I agree with you on the safety of Josh Allen because, I mean, he's easily the highest consistent scorer of the guys we have left. Kansas City, 26th in rushing yard, tied for 25th, I guess, so 25th and 26th. In rushing yards allowed 2 quarterbacks this season. Now it's, barely over 20 yards per game because most quarterbacks aren't running a lot. But still, the fact that that's where they rank, you feel good about. And
they get a lot of pressure, which that's usually when Allen runs a lot, right? Like this is a Chiefs team that they get to the quarterback a good bit. Those are usually the games that you see Allen really take off. I mean, it seemed like in the Pittsburgh game, it was once they started getting pressure that he all of a sudden started busting off those big runs.
Right. And then obviously one of the things you try to pay attention to, it doesn't always work out this way, but the more man defense a team plays in general, the easier it will be to run because you have defenders with their backs turned.
Yep.
If they're in zone, they're usually looking at you. Kansas City's top 10 when it comes to running man defense. Now, I mentioned earlier, the Texans' second worst pass defense by DVOA. A lot of their stats look better than they were because they played a pretty weak slate of quarterbacks. But they're also 8th in zone coverage. So that potentially is good for Lamar passing because, a number of those guys have been better against zone on the Ravens. But running the ball, there's a better chance that D'Amico Ryans, again, that's a defense that's top 6th in perfectly covered plays. It's a defense that doesn't screw up And, last week that worked great against Joe Flacco. This week it'll be harder for them. But, yeah, just because they're they're a disciplined defense that plays a lot of zone, that kind of scares me off of Lamar a little bit. Plus, Josh Allen, the touchdowns versus Lamar this year, running the ball especially, night and day. Which is why, to me, yeah, if you're spending the money, I don't hate the Lamar play. He's not on my list, but I thought about it. But, yeah, I would go Allen. My third guy.
Yeah, go ahead. I was going to say, Joe, real quick, because, of course, this is the way this stuff works. My computer is my work computer. It's saying I have to reboot it. So you go ahead and get into your third. I have to reboot it, and I will be right back.
All right. Well, I will see you soon.
Okay, buddy.
All right. So my third quarterback, and listen, I admit there is some real risk here. But, again, we're down to 8. You got to choose some guys that are a little risky. I like Jordan Love. I know how good that San Francisco defense is, and I am not trying to downplay that at all. I'm buying this Green Bay offense. Again, I don't buy their defense, but part of the reason I like Purdy so much is because I think Green Bay is scoring 20-plus points in this game. I look at Jordan Love during the second half of this season. I mean, he's been a top 10 quarterback. He's running on 4 straight games with at least 22 points on DK. I mean, really the only blip since week 10, because since week 10 over 18, it's that New York Giants Monday night game where he got outplayed by Tommy DeVito. It was super weird. But, that's Wink Martindale throwing a lot of weird blitzes at him, some stuff he hasn't seen before. The San Francisco defense is really good. They're not a defense that's going to confuse you a whole lot. This is, again, I think there's like some CJ Stroud versus Cleveland opportunity here where, again, it's both Green Bay and Houston, they're running a Shanahan-type offense. LaFleur is one of the best play callers in the NFL. I think he's proven that with how he revived Rodgers and what he's done with Love now. And, yeah, I also just think they're going to have to pass the ball because even if I'm wrong about this being a good Purdy game, I think if it's not a good Purdy game, it's guaranteed to be a huge McCaffrey game. So Green Bay is going to have to pass a lot. I mean, last week, Love throws 21 passes and he scored 22 points because Dallas didn't know what was going on. This week, he's throwing 30-plus, I think 35-plus passes. And when you got a guy who's running on 9 of 10 games with multiple passing touchdowns and you think he's going to throw the ball in the mid to high 30s, you got to feel good. And I also love that this Green Bay offense is not dependent on one player. It makes it hard to know who to pair with Jordan Love. That's probably the scariest thing about putting Love in your lineup is you go, who am I throwing in with him? The upside is they're not super expensive because of that. But, yeah, you're rolling the dice that you're going to put in a guy for $5,000. He's going to give you 3 points. And Jordan Love will throw 3 touchdowns, and you just missed. But so, again, that's a little worrying. That's, again, why I think, Baker, you're probably just betting on Godwin or Evans. It's an easier pairing. But, yeah, I think Jordan Love and LaFleur, I think this combo works. I think they're going to put up some reasonable numbers here at a low price. So as much as I respect the San Francisco defense, I think it's one that they're going to put points on. So Jordan Love, 6,200. Yeah, I really like all the lower tier quarterbacks this week, honestly. I have some real questions about, Stroud specifically is just, I don't know is he on your list now that I'm moving on?
He's not.
This guy,
this Ravens defense scares the shit out of me.
Yeah, I hope I'm wrong. I have a buddy who works for the Texans. I like Stroud. I like D'Amico Ryans. We obviously love Nico Collins on this podcast. I hope I'm wrong. Every guy below, I would have Stroud at the bottom, and not even regarding the price. Just straight up, he would be the last quarterback I'd pick this week. Maybe I'll be wrong because I think he'll have to throw a decent amount, but yeah, give me all those guys below him, above him. So, yeah.
So I had Love at 4, so not much.
Okay, there we go. Nice.
I think the Niners are going to be up, dominating. The main reason I didn't have Purdy, and I'll get into I think this is a huge CMC game, and that's why I'm just a little leery about Purdy overall.
Totally fair.
I think CMC is going to go off. The guy I have third is Jared Goff, 6,300. Again, I think that this is a shootout game. Like, of the 4 games, the one I feel the most confident we're going to see a lot of points, because the secondaries for both the Lions and Bucks are bad. They're real bad. Like, I mean, we saw it last week. The
There's some holes.
They were banged up. They didn't have A.J. Brown, and Devontae Smith just shredded them. Like, if they could have had anybody else kind of help out, I think that would have been a much more competitive game. But I just look at it, Goff. We've talked about this forever, that much different QB at home, like a much different QB. He's had 4 games of 20-plus points on DK since week 10. No surprise, 3 or 4 have came at home. And earlier this year at Tampa Bay, which normally he is not a great road QB, he just torched these guys. 353 yards, 2 scores, scored 25.4 points on DraftKings. And again, what I like about Goff, he's 6,300. I know who to pair him with, because I think St. Brown might be a must start regardless in cash lineups, whether you play Goff or not. But you can put him with him. And then again, there's cheap options, because I really like Reynolds again this week, to where if you want to do the double stack, you can, and it's not going to like break the bank. We're talking about like $18K to do that. Yeah. Was Goff on your list?
Yes, Goff is my number 5.
Okay.
So
and then you want to add on him?
I mean, I agree with all the good stuff that you're saying about Jared Goff.
Blitz stuff scares you?
The blitz stuff scares me. That's exactly it. I mean, I believe the Bucs are top 5. I know they're behind Minnesota and the Giants, but they are up there in how often they blitz. And they also, they'll blitz in different ways. When they were blitzing Hurts last week, sometimes they're blitzing, but they're keeping guys in contain on the outside. With Jared Goff, you're not worried about that. You're just sending 5+ guys to go get Jared Goff. And this season is, this is just PFF grade, which, you can actually be productive statistically and still have a bad PFF grade sometimes, because like a guy scores an 80-yard touchdown with yak.
Right.
But not blitz this season, Jared Goff, 90.4 grade. So really good. When blitzed, 70.3. That's more the Jared Goff you were seeing, that last year with the Rams. Like on average, that's who he was. Like the 70 grade. That's who he was last year with the Rams, kind of the beginning of his time with Detroit. Not the guy that we've seen, again, at home the last 2 years. So it does scare me. I just think there's some variance there where, that's why he's 5th. But to your point, Tampa Bay is also one of the defenses where we can target them a bit, especially in the passing game. And you have the super obvious pairing with Amon-Ra St. Brown. You do have some cheaper pairings that can make a lot of sense. So I think I like all of the bottom tier quarterbacks price range, because I'm a little worried about the Bucks or the Chiefs passing game, like going on the road in Buffalo. Obviously, they showed this last week that they can do fine in non-ideal weather, but I also think that Bills defense, as banged up as it's been, I think is better than the Dolphins, and so the high price tag scared me off Mahomes. So for me, it's Allen and then the 4 cheapest guys on the slate.
Yeah, I like that. My 5th guy, just so real quickly, because I don't think I'm going to be using him, but it's Lamar, 7,900. It feels really disrespectful to make this list, not have Mahomes, and to have Lamar 5th. Like it does. It feels like, man, I'm doing something wrong.
So,
especially for Lamar, who's in the midst of arguably his best 4-game stretch in DFS, where on DraftKings he scored 35 points or more in 2 of his last 4. He scored at least 19.5 in each of those games, and 11 touchdowns in that span. The issue is just the Ravens have proved all year they don't care who gets the glory. I mean, you look at it, they don't mess around. Like, they let Lamar be Lamar, but when they get close, they don't do what they used to, where Lamar was running it from the 2-3 yard line. It's give it to Gus Bus. That's why he's got 13. The dude has 12 receptions this year. He's got 13 rushing touchdowns. I think that there's a good chance that they've had so many of those situations, not just him, but Justice Hill, that they seem committed when they get close to run it in, be safe. And I understand that. So that, is kind of why Lamar's down on this list, because it does, again, like with Allen, Lamar has got to exercise some demons, right? Like he is not performed in the playoffs. And I would not be surprised if this is a statement game for Lamar, who, to his credit, or in fairness to him, I have not liked the schemes that they've ran offensively
prior to this season.
Yeah, prior to this season. And I think you've seen it, especially the last couple of weeks versus really good teams and really big games. He looks free, and that dude is scary when he's playing free. And you're right about like the Texans playing zone, but that's what's so weird. They've had some issues with running QBs this year. Lamar had 6 for 38 week 1. Richardson, in less than a half, had 3 for 35 and 2 touchdowns. And Kyler Murray
next year, Richardson.
And Kyler Murray had 7 for 51 and a touchdown. So that is my one concern about like overlooking Lamar, is what happens if this is the game where he has like 120 yards rushing, which we know he's capable.
Yeah.
And he breaks like 2. And then all of a sudden you're going, man, he was 7,900 and he scored 40 points. Like I just screwed up big time, but I think it's too risky. I'm completely with you on Baker. I don't hate the Brock play at all. Again, it's just, for me, it's just
right. How does that game play out?
I'm betting on the CMC game. Yeah. Very good point by Josh. Who would have thought Patrick Mahomes would be 6,800 on an 8-team slate?
No, it sounds nuts. And then, he's not on either of our lists. The other thing with Lamar I'd just throw out there is, while he was not on my list, one of the reasons was not week 1 against Houston, where he had his worst DK, his only under 10-point week of the season. It was his first week in the offense. It was CJ Stroud's, also importantly, first game in the NFL, again, against an awesome defense.
Yep.
So he only threw 22 passes because they won that game 25-9. Like, there wasn't a need to flex things that week.
It was an ugly game. I remember it because I had Lamar in a bunch of fantasy leagues.
As did I. So, that's not my concern. I might be wrong to not have him on my list. Again,
I don't think you're wrong. Like you should.
It's
the case.
It's the price point, because unlike Stroud, if we're just going straight up, outside of Allen, I probably would have Lamar second. But again, considering I'm not in on Mahomes, and then I'm definitely not in on Stroud this week. Going from Lamar to Brock Purdy is 1,400, and that's just that was too much for me.
That's a lot. So just real quickly, again, going over the QBs, we shared 4 or 5. So we both had Baker at 1. We both had Love. We both had Goff. We both had Allen. The only difference was you had Brock, I had Lamar, but you had Brock higher, which makes sense again because of the price. I like the way that I think that's right, that you have your top 3 are all cheap, to where even as much as I believe in Allen, and I probably will have some lineups even in cash with them with Shakir and Kincaid, I do think that this week, especially with the cost of the running backs that you want and the receivers, it's probably smart to play one of those 3 QBs that are basically the 3 cheapest. I mean, you could even actually throw in Brock and make it the 4 cheapest. All right, the running backs. Obviously, I got CMC 1. That's why I didn't have Brock on my list, but he costs a fortune. He's 8,800. This is, for me, I mean, this is honestly just a very short explanation, obviously, because, I mean, you don't need to be a rocket scientist to figure out why you want to play CMC. But in his last 2 games with the Niners, coming off a bye/week off, 48 touches, 313 total yards, and 5 touchdowns. He scored 20-plus points on DK and 8 of 10. He's about the safest thing in fantasy. One of those 10 games that he did not score 20-plus, he scored 19.3. So he scored 19.3 points or more in 9 of his last 10. And I think the Niners respect this Packers offense And I think that they run it a little more than people expect. I wouldn't even actually be surprised if we see some Elijah Mitchell, because remember, CMC is coming off an injury, and he looked really good the last 2 weeks when he got work, both in the Washington game and their finale versus the Rams. But I just don't trust any other back in this slate. Like, truly, I do not trust any other back in this slate. I mean, that's granted why CMC is 8,800. But it's also why I think he's worth it because, yeah, there's some other guys I'm going to give you, and I feel pretty good about him, but CMC is literally the only guy I can trust.
And I completely agree. He's my number one as well, which obviously part of me hates it because he's 8,800, which, again, like I don't have that big of an aversion to picking, the number one highest priced guy. But when it's by $2,000, I don't love it. But it's like you said, it's impossible for me anyway. Outside of McCaffrey getting hurt, which knock on wood will not.
It's 600 more than anybody else on the slate. Like that's what stings. Is like they're in another player within $600.
Right. Yeah, that's a great point. It's even going outside of the running backs. But yeah, you look at the rest of the slate, and I mean. It's the simplest way to do it is just look at the opposition ranks. 5 of the next highest priced running backs are against defenses ranked in the top 9 on DK.
Run defense still matters, Joe. Like if you look at the playoffs year after year, having a good run defense still matters.
Yeah, I mean, especially if you want to come back, which again is, I think, kind of the problem here for Green Bay is that their defense isn't good against the run or the pass. So. And then even in the situation, too, where this is a shootout, or because I don't think this is going to be a 17-13 game.
Right.
So even if it's a shootout, even if Green Bay, obviously not to the same extent, but gets out early on San Francisco, could happen. Maybe, again, tipped pass, they get a pick. San Francisco's down 14-0. Who doesn't come out is Christian McCaffrey. Like, he's still out there. He's still catching passes. Like, again, this is a guy who, against Baltimore in a game where they were down pretty much the whole game because of things like tip passes, he has 10 targets. It was only 6 receptions for 28 yards. That's 8.8 points. And the guy ran for 100 yards on top of it.
I was say he had most of his rushing yards in the second half as well. So, like, almost
right,
all
because
of his damage.
They're playing softer in the run game.
Right.
So, yeah, you can look at other guys and, Detroit, you also have to kind of – I think Detroit's offensive line has the potential to do some damage against what's normally a good Tampa Bay run defense. You still got to pick which running back you like more.
I'm with you.
Rachaad White, he's going to be the main guy in that lineup. You know that. Like McCaffrey, he's got that. It's against the number one defense against running backs. So
who just shut down Kyron Williams, who was arguably the second best running back all this season.
And then, you get to like the Ravens too, where it's like, Gus Edwards, it's the goal line back. I mean, that Houston run defense, I know they're 15th on DK, but they're second in adjusted line yards and then second in DVOA. So they've given up points to running backs, but if you're just straight up trying to run the ball, they make it hard. So, yeah, to me, there's a good reason for me to go against every other running back in the slate. There's not a good one outside of price for Christian McCaffrey. So that's why for me, it's got to be him.
All right, who's your second then?
I mean, I'm rolling with him again, even though I have some concerns about the potential for Buffalo to just get out to a lead and maybe he doesn't see the field as much. But Pacheco, because. I mean, last week
he's fourth on my list, FYI. So I'm with you. Like I like Pacheco.
Yeah, he was first for me last week. I did get the production I was hoping for, but it's not like it was bad. He got 24 carries. They just some tough sledding there, but 89 yards, a touchdown, and if the game isn't completely out of hand, I think there's a reasonable chance he was getting us that 100-yard bonus, but. At a certain point, you're up 19. You're going to Clyde Edwards-Helaire. So I don't think that happens in this game. However this plays out, I don't think this is Kansas City is in complete control and Pacheco comes out in favor of a guy who was a first-round running back, which will never cease to amuse me. But, yeah, I mean, again, he's had double-digit points in every game he's played since Week 11. Obviously, there's some injuries there, but we're talking about 6 straight games. 3 of those games are 24-plus points. 3 of his last 4, at least 18 carries. And actually, the only time he hasn't hit 15 carries was the Las Vegas game, which might have been kind of the worst game of the year for Kansas City.
Well, the Raiders kept the ball away from him. I mean, they literally ran it the whole second half, it felt like.
And playing the most inspired Raiders defense I think any of us has seen in years, because even when they were kind of good for a couple of years there, it was mostly the offense. Yeah, so, yeah, Pacheco, he's getting the volume. He's clearly become the guy in that one. And I don't see Kansas City getting blown out. I think this is a close game either way, which means I think he stays involved either way. And even in that Cincinnati game, I think McKinnon was out in that one, but 7 receptions. So he's become more involved generally in the passing game. And that Kansas City defense is also a defense where they're better against the pass than the run. You know, DVOA, again, which also adjusts for opponents, which is why I talk about DVOA so much, because, you know, beating up on the Jets passing game
You're
is not
playing
impressive.
Desmond Ridder every week.
Yeah,
your secondary may not be that good. Yeah.
Kansas City's 5th against the pass. They are 27th against the run. So this is a defense that funnels you towards the run. Oh, sorry. Shoot, I'm talking about
Buffalo.
Kansas City's defense.
Yeah.
Jesus. Well, there's also a reason why James Cook's going to show up on my list. But yeah, Buffalo, I mean, that's always been the story. They are not quite as large of a difference. 9th, though, against the pass, 17th against the run. So this is still a top 10 pass defense. It is a middle-of-the-road run defense. It is one that we have seen. They're actually slightly better than they've been in some of these other years. But to me, always the way you're trying to attack the Buffalo defense is you punch them in the mouth in the run game.
Yep.
And then you set up the pass after that, off of that. Most of the time, I think that's old school way of thinking. That's stupid. Against Buffalo, I think it is actually what you should do. So, and I think both of us think there's a reasonable chance that Kansas City is trying to play more that way. Because they have a defense where, again, because that defense is so much better against the pass, you want to control the ball, you want to get an early lead, and then you just want to keep that ball control and make Josh Allen antsy. Make him think he has to come up with that big play. That's how you want to beat Buffalo. So, yeah, Pacheco is my number 2.
Yeah, so like I said, I have him 4th. If you are someone that thinks the Chiefs are going to win this game, I think he absolutely needs to be in your lineup, because I just think the easiest way for the Chiefs to win this game is for Pacheco to basically be the engine, right? Like, of this offense, keep Josh Allen off the field. Not a coincidence, his last 2 starts, 42 touches. Again, 24 last week in a wild card round. Or that's rush attempts. I didn't include his catches. That's 42 rush attempts the last 2 games, 24. And the big thing for me is he has played 5 games since McKinnon has been on IR. In those games, 21 targets, 20 receptions. If you add his yards, that's an extra 2 points a game, which I know that seems insignificant.
Oh, no, that's very real.
Yeah, for a slate, especially of running backs that are pretty equal, you know, it is what it is. I think Buffalo is going to win. That's why Pacheco's 4th. It's so funny John English brings this up, because I may end up looking really stupid with who I have 2nd and 3rd on my list, because if Dalvin Cook at 4K ends up being just a factor this week, I'm going to look really dumb for doing this, but I have Gus Edwards and Justice Hill 2-3 because I think the Ravens are going to hand it to the Texans. I think the Texans, every year we see this in the wild card round where a team looks great. And I'm not taking anything away from the Ravens. They played a great game. They had a great plan. That was a good Browns team. I don't want to dismiss it, but then we overinflate them, and then they just get absolutely thumped the next round. And I think people are forgetting, because these Ravens have not played basically in 2 weeks. They didn't play their guys in the Steelers game. This Ravens team ended the season just destroying the San Francisco 49ers, literally breaking the Miami Dolphins. This team is elite both on the offensive and defensive side of the ball. And because of that, I think Edwards and Hill, again, now I am, trust me, checking constantly to see what is the deal with Cook, because it does scare me. I saw Harbaugh say that he eventually will, have a role, whatever the fuck that means. But I think Edwards 5,700, though, is arguably the best value this year. He saw the second most carries in a game this season versus Miami. That was the first full game without Keaton Mitchell, who we know is on IR. Yeah. This was a game the Ravens were up huge, and yet he still had his most carries on the season. He even saw 10 carries in that meaningless Week 18 game versus the Steelers, and he only played the first half. Edwards, despite being 42nd in snap share, 37th in opportunity share, and 24th in carries, which, again, those are going up in the playoffs, I promise you, because they don't have Keaton Mitchell. He has 13 touchdowns. That's fourth among all running backs with 15 goal line carries this season. He is the Jerome Bettis, right? Like that guy that when they get the ball on the one, if you have Lamar, you're going mother fudger, because you know the Gus Edwards touchdown is coming. And he's on a team that runs it the most in the NFL by a pretty significant margin at 31 times a game. I understand Lamar has some of that, but there has been less and less designed runs and more of just Lamar, not seeing anything and taking off. Right. They want Lamar to stay in that pocket and throw and really save those rushes for when the defense just falls asleep and he can take off. And it's for that same reason that I have Justice Hill third at 4,800, because did I mention the Ravens run it the most of any team in the NFL? And they're playing in a game that I think they're going to be up and potentially the entire second half, just kind of trying to wind out the clock. If you look at what Hill's done, again, since the Mitchell injury, because that is what it's all about, he scored 8.7 points in the game that Mitchell went out with his injury. That was relatively early. I believe it was either second quarter or early in the third. He then followed it up with his biggest game of the year, 22.2 points, and his only full game with the starters and everybody playing for the Ravens without Mitchell. And if you look at it, Mitchell started getting significant snaps week 9. Before that, Hill scored 8.3 points or more in 4 of 7 games. He's 4,800. So, again, for cash games, and again, this is a tough running back slate, in my opinion.
Yeah.
You're just looking for 2-3 times your salary, because I feel pretty good about the receivers. I feel good about my tight ends, the QBs. 4,800, you're talking about if he can get 12 to 15 points, you are golden. He's been scoring 8 points or more in games Mitchell doesn't play basically about 70% of the time if you look at the games before Mitchell started playing and then after he got hurt. And he's got 2 games of 12.9 points or more in that first 7 weeks before Mitchell kind of became a part of this offense. And we talk about you have to believe in a game script. Like, I feel like to do well in these small DFS slates, you got to look at the games and kind of figure out, okay, what is going to happen? I feel very confident the Texans are going to win this game. I feel very confident the Texans are going to be up. This is no disrespect to CJ Stroud. This is no disrespect to the Texans or what they've done. I just think the Ravens are the best team in the NFL. And again, they have something to prove. Lamar has something to prove. All of them do. Even Harbaugh, for God's sakes, because yes, he's won 2 Super Bowls.
Yeah, no, you're right.
But it's been a minute, since he's had any success in the playoffs. I think this is a great situation for them. This is a very rested team with a lot of veterans. And I just think they're going to cook. And again, I had Lamar 5th, so there is fear that Lamar ends up having the monster game. That's obviously not good for wanting to have Justice Hill and Gus Edwards as 2nd and 3rd in your running back rankings. But I do believe that there's a good chance one of them, if not both, scores double figures. They're both relatively reasonably priced. And if you were one of those people that think the Texans are going to be in the game or potentially up, Justice Hill is in a real value because he is their receiving back. Obviously, pay attention to the Dalvin Cook news because he better not screw this shit up for me. But I like both Ravens back a lot. That's why I had them 2-3. And again, I had Pacheco 4.
Yeah, I mean, again, that Houston run defense scares me. Second in adjusted line yards, first in actual yards per carry. They don't give up big plays, so second level in open
I'm not
field.
looking for big plays, though. I mean, Gus Edwards could score 12 points on 15 yards rushing. Like, seriously, because he's going to get the ball if they get on the goal line.
Well, what I was about to get to is the one area where they are not elite, according to the FTN charting. They are 22nd in power success. So that's 2 yards or less to go, goal line, third down, fourth down. They're 22nd. So that is the one spot. You can pound it a little bit in those situations. So that's why ultimately for me, Gus ends up coming in at 5 for me. And Justice Hill would be like the 6th guy for me. Hill, I think, again, he's significantly cheaper for a reason. And Cleveland did have 9 receptions for their backs last week. So that's obviously a pro Justice Hill moment. But there's also the chance that he scores 2 points. Where I am with you on, I will be surprised if Baltimore loses. And that means Gus Edwards is probably scoring a touchdown. And we're talking about double-digit points for a guy who's under 6,000. And so that's enough he is my number 5. So my number 3, I'm going Aaron Jones. Because this is just,
again, I think, right?
Yeah, it's a good player, a guy who I was hyping up, prior to the season starting, and then feeling really stupid for quite a long time. Where I was just like, yeah, Aaron Jones, I don't know why people are fading this guy. Like, I think they're probably going to be run heavier this season than they've been. I still think he's got juice in the tank.
Yep.
And he's super banged up. He misses some weeks. He has a bunch of 8 or 9 point games. And then seem to get actually healthier down the stretch. Plus Green Bay is in hey, we're an actual fucking playoff team.
Right.
Let's give the ball to Aaron Jones. He has 4 straight games of 20 carries. 4 straight games of 17 plus points.
Of 100 plus yards, which to me is what's insane. This has been some pretty good run defenses he's played.
Right. Like Dallas, and, obviously, that game was bizarre because that was a top 5 defense this year. The Bears, down the stretch, second half of the season after the Montez Sweat trade, was a top 5 defense this year.
They were one of the best run defenses all year, too.
Carolina, the defense was not really the problem. Now, Minnesota, one of the most improved defenses on the year under Brian Flores. And over 5 yards per carry in every one of those games on 20 carries per game. Well, over 20 carries per game. And now he actually hasn't had a lot of receptions in that time period, probably because he's exhausted from carrying the ball 20 plus times. But this is also a guy who has 5 games this year with at least 4 receptions.
Yeah, especially in games that, if you looked at they've been down that he's played in, I think those are all the games that he has the most receptions.
And also, he only has played 12 games.
Yep.
So it's not 5 and 18 now, counting the playoff game. That's 5 and 12. So it's almost 50%. And this game, I think very good chance Green Bay will be trailing. If they are, I think we're getting 4 or 5 receptions. If they're not, he's carrying the ball 20 plus times. So the matchup is tougher, which is why I like Pacheco a little bit more than I like Aaron Jones. Plus, I saved the $300. But I mean, he's good. And like I said earlier when I talked up Jordan Love, I think they're going to score points. I think they're breaking 20. I think, I'll say, give me 3 straight up. They will score 3 touchdowns. And if they're scoring 3 touchdowns, one of them at least is Aaron Jones. So
I think if they score 3 touchdowns, even if it's not an Aaron Jones touchdown, he's got to have a decent game for them because I don't think
because they're moving the ball.
Right, exactly. So does that mean James Cook is 4th on your list because he's 5th on mine?
James Cook is 4th on my list as well.
All right, real quickly because we don't need to go into too much deep. I will admit though that Cook is the guy I keep wondering, am I missing out? Because this Chiefs defense down the stretch had some real issues stopping the run. I just don't know if I trust the Bills to really, commit to what they did versus Dallas, which maybe that should have been the key to, seeing what Aaron Jones was going to do last week. And the other issue is something you bring up all the time is Josh Allen is going to vulture touchdowns, near the goal line. But
exactly.
He scored 12.4 points last week versus the Steelers. That ended a 3-game stretch where he didn't eclipse 8.2 points. So that was a rough stretch. But before that, remember, he had that monster stretch where he scored at least 16 points on DK in 5 straight. But the reason he has to be at least considered is his volume has remained that of like a number one back, double-digit carries in 9 straight, 16 or more carries in 6 of his last 8. Over his last 5 games, he's averaging over 20 touches per when you add in his receptions. And again, it would not shock me if he went ham on this Chiefs team. And obviously, I'm somebody I think the Bills are going to win. I do think it's going to be close, so I just don't think you can just blow out the Kansas City Chiefs.
I'd be surprised.
Yeah. So that does concern me because I think you're going to need Allen to obviously keep being Allen. But if there is a world where you're, again, because we're trying to predict game scripts is a big part of building these DFS lineups. If you think the Bills are going to win and win relatively easily, James Cook obviously needs to be a play because it could be like that Dallas game where once they get up, it just becomes an avalanche. And we've seen the games usually that he has the most carries. Those are his biggest games. So I definitely think he needs to be included. Anything you want to add on Cook before we move on to the receivers?
I mean, I'll just reiterate the stats I was throwing out accidentally when I was talking about Pacheco, which is, this Kansas City defense. This is, I think, by far the best defense that they have had in the Mahomes-Reed era. But it's because they're so good against the pass. Again, DVOA, this is the number 5 defense against the pass. This is the number 27 defense against the run. And the only reason Cook is not higher is, again, because Josh Allen's more likely to score touchdowns in the run game than James Cook is. And that hurts. So that's why he is all the way down here at 4 for me. But, I mean, if we get a touchdown, then I think there's that 20-point game potential. I don't think we're going to see something like that.
Chad asked, playoff Lenny is out. What confused me was Ty Johnson was the guy that ended up actually, I think, getting the most carries out of the running backs. Is Latavius Murray or Ty Johnson somebody we should be considering? Because we know one of them obviously will be involved. What scares me, though, is like last week they had all 4 backs at least somewhat involved. Because like I said, I think Johnson had like 8 carries. Fournette had 7. Obviously, Cook had his. And then Murray had a few. So that's the only thing that scares me is they're definitely a discount, but I have no idea how they're going to break up the carries outside.
Right. I mean, in cash games, I don't think so.
Right.
Now, obviously, you're competing against 10,000 people. And
GPP, yeah.
Yeah, then, hey, whatever your gut tells you, because like you said, maybe someone who is, a super Bills fan that ask them what their vibe is, because I could not tell you which of those guys to bet on. So, whatever your gut says, whatever the Bills beat writer, the Bills fan says, if you want to throw one of those guys in to save money so that we can get McCaffrey in with some other higher price guys at other positions, I'm not against it. But in a cash game, I mean, there's just such a high chance that we're talking like 2 points there that I can't do it.
And again, do keep checking about Dalvin freaking Cook.
Yeah, keep an eye out.
He's 4K. I mean, obviously, if you know he's going to have some kind of role, even if it's a small one at 4K, especially with some of these more expensive guys in cash games that I really feel like it's worth, rolling the dice with them and playing a riskier play, or even maybe 1 or 2 of them, just knowing that they're going to score enough that, it can counterseed it. But moving on to the wide receivers, my number 1 has so much to do with the fact that Baker is my guy, but it's Mike Evans, 7,200. I'm not going to let last week fool me. He had 2 drops. One of them would have been basically a 12-pointer. I mean, it was probably a 60-yard touchdown. Baker threw a dime. Again, Baker was slinging it last week. If he does that versus the Lions, I think it's going to cause real issues. But he still caught 3 passes for 48 yards. He saw 10 targets in their first meeting. Again, they looked awful in the first time that these 2 teams played, but that was a long time ago. And I just have a feeling Evans goes off, and love that you can stack him with Baker at, 13-2 on DraftKings. He's had 115 yards receiving or more in 3 of 6 career playoff games. So it's basically 50-50. He's going to do that. I like the fact that he's coming off a game where he didn't, because Mike Evans has just proved me wrong my entire fantasy, football analysis or contributor. Like, I've always doubted the dude, and all he does is just keep balling out. And we just saw again last week, like, Puka is the big physical receiver for the Rams, and they had no answer for him. Mike Evans is the ultimate big physical receiver. And if you believe in Detroit, that's even better for Mike Evans and Baker, because that means they're going to be down and slinging it. And this is a secondary that I like to do that against. So I wanted to go with my boy St. Brown. He was number 1 last week. He's right up at the top this week, but I have Mike Evans 1. Who is your number 1 wide receiver this week?
We are once again aligned at number 1. I think this is a big bounce back week. Third best matchup advantage on PFF. If we go by FTN's charting about yards given up to what they have as number 1 wide receivers, Detroit's 31st.
It's not good.
So, yeah, again, only Washington, who was somehow 14.8 yards worse. Because, good Lord, Washington. But, yeah, 89 yards per game, according to FTN Fantasy. 2 number 1 wide receivers by the Detroit defense. And, yeah, like we said, we're in on Baker. We think both teams are going to probably be scoring points in this game. He's $1,000 cheaper than our guy, Amon-Ra.
Only 100 more than Nico in a dome with a better matchup. Yeah,
much better matchup. 500 under Debo, which, hey, I like Debo every week, but is it the Ayuk week? Is it the Kittle week? Again, we feel confident, as you do most weeks, it's a McCaffrey week. Who's the other guy? You never know. Obviously, there's a chance it's the Godwin week instead.
What's the Packers zone thing? Because I know that's for your big thing. Do you know? Because I'm sure you probably looked it up.
So I do not have what they played against Dallas, nor do I have their final week of the season numbers. But let me see. I just had it. I think they were like
the reason I brought it up was Joe has been all over all this year that if teams play a very high percentage of zone, that has been the Debo game, because Debo just smokes zone defenses. Teams that play more of a high percentage of man, that's when you kind of want to go Ayuk or Kittle.
So I have it through the first 16 weeks of the season, so I don't have the last 2 weeks.
That's all right. I'm just curious what they've done overall.
17th both week, or both coverages.
Okay.
So they're basically, they are right in the middle,
so
playing man and zone. It makes
it even more confusing if you want to play a 49ers wide receiver.
But yeah, so again, when we get those zone numbers, then we know to go Debo. If it's man, we know to go Ayuk. When it's in the middle, then even more confusion. And that's the other thing is Detroit's defense was 10th in man coverage rate. Now, people should always keep in mind, pretty much every defense is playing significantly more zone than they are man, because PFF had them charted at 27% man, 72%
just
zone.
like the blitz stuff outside of the Vikings and the Giants.
So there's your like 2 or 3 exceptions, but most of the time you're not getting blitzed. Most of the time you're facing zone. But Detroit still, though, 10th overall in man rate. Mike Evans, by far the best Tampa Bay receiver against man. Again, these are a little slightly outdated, but he was at 3.19 yards per route run, which was 12th in the NFL against man. And so his span, he was basically averaging through those first 15 games a point for every route run against man. Chris Godwin was averaging about he was averaging about a third of a point per route run. So he was 3 times more efficient than Chris Godwin was against man. So majority of the time they will still be facing zone. I am not going to say don't play Chris Godwin, because again, if Baker's my number 1, kind of like both guys. But for me, Mike Evans clear number one against this Detroit defense.
So who do you have too? Do you have the Sun God?
Yeah. Which again,
Go ahead.
I loved having DeMarcus Robinson. I loved having DeMarcus Robinson so high last week, so I could feel cool that I had some cheap player. But yeah, again, he is the guarantee. We know who Jared Goff's first read is. I assume Laporta will be more healthy this week, but I still don't think we're going to be anywhere close to a truly healthy, uncompromised Laporta. And yeah, we've got a guy who's running on 5 straight weeks of 21 plus points. Like last week was his worst week in the last month, and he had 7 catches for 110 yards. He just didn't catch a touchdown. That was it. That was the big problem. So yeah, and again, the only thing I'm a little bit worried about in this game for the Detroit offense really is what if Todd Bowles throws enough change-ups, throws off Jared Goff. But even if that happens, again, Amon-Ra is not I'm running 25 yards downfield. If there's pressure, I don't see the ball guy. He's primarily a slot guy. One of the ways they're going to try to beat the blitz, I'm sure, is being like, hey, that means Amon-Ra is going to be one-on-one. Let's just get it to him immediately. Let's give him a quick slant. So I will be shocked if he doesn't hit another 7 receptions at least. I think we're seeing, his normal 9+ targets. So even at 8,200, again, outside of Evans, I don't know which San Francisco guy with super confidence to go with. I've got Nico Collins. We all love him. He's facing the best pass defense in the NFL, regardless of the 9th ranking against wide receivers. Just overall, this is the hardest defense to pass against. So yeah, for me, Amon-Ra.
Yeah, I had him number 1 last week, number 2 this week. All I'm going to say, because you made basically the case for it, is I said last week going into it, in home games this season, 22.18 points per game on DK, at least 18.2 in all of them, 9.62 targets per, at least 7 in all of them, over 7 receptions, at least 6 in each of them, over 101 yards per game, at least 70 in all of them, and 4 touchdowns. And what did he do? He went out and caught 7 passes for 110 yards and scored 21 points on DK. So that is his floor. Like that's basically
right.
What you're going to get from him. The question is, and this is what we talked about last week, it's hard to know for sure if St. Brown's ever just going to go off because like he did week 18. I get that. Those are really rare. Like he's very consistent in that like 16 to 25, 26 point range, but we don't see him normally go off. But if this game turns into a shootout, who knows? I'm going to have a hard time not putting him in my lineup. I reluctantly had to include this guy third. Nico Collins, 7,100. Yeah, because I was going to be completely off the Texans this week, completely off Nico Collins. And then I saw that Marlon Humphreys is out for the Ravens. What happened last week, right before, we kind of got ready to do the show, news came out that the Browns' best corner got injured, in practice. And it's just now at a point that I can't in good conscience not include him. Since the Dell injury early in the Denver game, he's now played 6 games. His numbers since basically that injury, 43 targets. That includes a game where he had 1 target versus the Jets. 36 receptions. That includes 1 reception in that game versus the Jets. Averaging just under 100 yards per game, 98.83. 21.4 points per game on DK in that 6-game stretch. 2 games of 37 plus points, including 2 weeks ago, 3 of 22 plus. And we saw last week the Browns without their best corner allow Collins to catch 6 passes, 7 targets, 96 yards, and a touchdown. I'm saying I think the Ravens are going to win. I think the Ravens are going to be up big. I don't know how you can't like Nico Collins because, again, there is no Tank Dell. The Ravens are one of the best defenses in the league versus tight end, so that's not good for Dalton Schultz. And as much as I loved Noah Brown for a 3-4 game stretch where he was, like the second coming of Jerry Rice, he hasn't really done anything since. He's been banged up. He played 1 play. He got injured. I don't know. It looks like he's probably going to miss this week. Now you're talking about Hutchinson and Mechie and all these other guys. I may end up actually moving because I don't think, like I said, you can't play CMC, Evans, St. Brown, and Collins. I tried. You can't do it. I may end up taking. I would love to. I may end up taking out St. Brown and moving Collins up to 2 because I think Collins' upside is higher, but it's riskier. And I do want to point that out because, again, in cash, usually if you get to 150, 160, you're freaking golden. Especially in a smaller slate, you should be golden. So I have Collins third. Who do you have?
So, well, real quick, I'll say that I do have Collins fourth. Okay. Because, yeah, it's like you said, this guy's been on a tear. He is the option. And, again, this could be a real struggle for them to pass the ball most of the game. And, I mean, like we saw last week, he should have had that one where it's just don't overthrow him. You have a 60-yard touchdown. And again, as good as this defense is, according to the PFF advantage stuff, where they're looking at his overall grade versus the corners that they think he's matching up against, 4th highest advantage this week. So as good as he is, there is going to be, or as good as that Ravens defense is, I may be fading the Texans a bit this week. I am certainly not fading Nico Collins. I knew I wanted a Green Bay wide receiver in here because, again, I'm pretty high on Jordan Love. The obvious difficulty is picking which one of those wide receivers to go with.
Like me last week, literally mentioning 3 Packers wide receivers and none of them being Romeo Doubs.
Right. Honestly, he was the guy I was least thinking about as well. So I am 100% with you. Of course, yeah, he scores 30 points. Him and Jake Ferguson, I think, were
so mad at him. So mad. I'm like, where's Wicks? Where's my boy Reed? Where's Watson? Watson got 1 target. At least Wicks caught a touchdown. But
so,
it is what it is.
Yeah, and like Jaden Reed's generally been the guy that I've been pushing most often. He has, again, prior to scoring 0 points against Dallas, he had 4 straight games with at least 17 points. Watson was coming back. We're like, ooh, that's interesting. But again, like I said earlier, about the running backs for the Bills, if you don't know, if you're not 100% sure, like, I think this is the guy, what you want to do is you want to just go with whatever the beat writer, that if you know a beat writer who follows the team, what do they think? If you know a knowledgeable fan of the team, what do they think? My roommate, who's a Packers fan, has been telling me for like a month that Dontavian Wicks is the best receiver on this team.
He's a beast, man. Second most snaps last week, Joe, of the wide receivers, which
is like I was looking at all the stats, and I will say that was probably the reason we should have been thinking more about Romeo Doubs. Was he's been the most consistent guy in getting snaps this season, where he has only 2 games where he's played under 50% of the snaps.
Wow.
And those are the 2 games against Chicago. The first game of the season, he played 48%. And then week 18, he played 18%. So, yeah, outside of those 2 games, he's been the guy. So, again, a lot of good reason to go with him. But Dontavian Wicks is 4,900. Dontavian Wicks has got 4 touchdowns the last 3 weeks. He has 4 straight weeks of double-digit points. Like you said, again, hard to predict the snap percentages because especially Watson coming back, maybe that's going to throw things off. But last week, he outsnapped my guy, Jaden Reed. So if he plays,
both Reed and Watson are not 100%, which is why I think it's safe that he ends up playing the second most. Yeah. Like Watson's playing, Reed's playing, but just with all the injury tags and what's been going on, I don't think either one of them are anywhere near 100%.
Right. And if he's playing 60+%, that's good enough. I feel good about him at 4,900. So, yeah, obviously, again, last week, listen, it was, like you said, he caught a touchdown. He had 2 targets otherwise, overall. Caught them both 25 yards in a score. He's also, we love our every other week thing because bizarrely it seems to work sometimes. Week 15, 6 receptions, 7 targets. Week 16, 2 receptions on 2 targets, scores a touchdown. Week 18, 6 receptions, 7 targets.
I'm all in.
Week 19, 2 receptions on 2 targets.
You sold me.
So this is our 6 reception, 7 target week, everybody. Let's believe in it. Dontavian Wicks, 4,900.
I love it. He was not on my list. It's because I had the 3 most expensive wide receivers, or 3 of the most expensive, 1, 2, 3. So I went under 4K with both of my other 2 options because you can't have it all. That's the bad. I tell people all the time, you can play whoever you want in DFS, but you can't have it all. I've got Khalil Shakir, 3,800 as my 4th wide receiver. Okay. As of right now, it looks like Gabe Davis is not going to play. He's going to miss another game. This means the 3rd straight game with Shakir being the number 2 wide receiver. I understand he's not the number 2 passing option. I think that's right. Dalton Kincaid, but he's the number 2 wide receiver. I know it's a tough matchup versus a really good Chiefs defense, to your point, against the pass, like one of the best in the NFL. But, I mean, the 2 games without Davis, 9 targets, 9 receptions, 136 yards, a touchdown, 31.6 points on DK, at least 12.1 in each of those 2 games. That would be 3 times his salary this week. That's all we're looking for. And we've seen before the Chiefs are going to try to take away Diggs. Do you remember a guy named Gabe Davis who everybody was really frustrated and had done nothing, who was the number 2 wide receiver going into a playoff game just a couple of years? He caught 4 freaking touchdowns. So I think the Chiefs, again, are going to try to take away Diggs. Now, that could mean it's a Kincaid game, but to have the number 2 receiver with Josh Allen at 3,800, it feels like stealing. He's probably going to be in a majority of my cash lineups. I have him 4th only because it's hard to, doubt Collins, Brown, and Evans because they're all, in my opinion, not crazy expensive, but I really like Shakir at 3,800. He's 4th. And again, he'll probably be in a majority of my lineups where I have to make a decision with the other 3 guys in CMC.
So, you already covered my 4, which is Nico, and now you've covered my 5, which is Shakir. I will say, what rides on it all rides on Gabe Davis. If Gabe Davis suits up and we think he's playing, I'm probably bailing because here's some fun stuff with Kansas City defense this year against the pass, according to FTN Fantasy's charting. Against number 1 wide receivers, they have given up 49.4. This is not counting the playoffs, so obviously we're not counting Tyreek catching the one good play for Miami last week, but 49.4 yards per game to number 1 wideouts.
Well, he still only had like 60 even with that catch, so it kind of backs up that stat.
The only team ahead of them by 0.1 yard was the New England Patriots. So they are 2nd in the league in yards given up to number 1 wide receivers. Against number 3 wide receivers, 34.8 yards. Also one of the better numbers in the league. That is 5th. What happens when we go to number 2 wide receivers? Now, this yardage number is not going to sound super impressive because the reality is, on average, unless you're the number 1, you're not having a bunch of huge games.
You had to go over this last week. We trust you, Joe.
25th against number 2 wide receivers in yardage. They actually give up, by 0.2 yards, more yardage to number 2 wide receivers than they do number 1 wide receivers.
Who are obviously getting less targets, less plays that they're the first look. Right.
But again, to your point, that's even on 2.5 fewer targets because, again, you're still trying to feed your number 1 against anyone. Big reason for that, L'Jarius Sneed is awesome. People don't realize this because all they've heard about Kansas City this year is Kelsey's getting old and he's dating Taylor Swift and their receivers can't catch passes. Listen, that pass defense is good. Sneed is awesome, but there is only one of him. And he will be on Stephon Diggs. So if Gabe Davis is out, fire up Shakir, who honestly, I think he's a better receiver than Gabe Davis. But I don't know if Buffalo feels that way. So if Gabe Davis is out there, pivot away. If not, I'm with you 100%. He's that guy who, him and a Packers receiver, I will probably try a different Packers receiver in like 4 different ones. But to me, that's where I'm trying to save a little bit of money. Is I'm going to throw a Packers receiver in there. I'm going to throw Shakir in there, and that's how we're going to get our Mike Evans. We're going to try to get our Mike Evans, Amon-Ra, CMC lineup in.
You can do it. You just can't have the
It's tough.
3 receivers and the running back. You can't.
But we're only on Baker too, so we're saving a little money there.
That's right. But I'm telling you, you're not going to be able to get the 4.
No,
I spent over an hour today. So the 5th guy, again, because I'm trying to save money, but I do like this play, is Josh Reynolds, 3,700. This is another play that it changes if Raymond is back, but he's trending toward not playing. We will know tomorrow. That Dan Campbell flat out said if he doesn't practice on Friday, he's not going to play. He was one of my favorite plays last week. He was, I think, number 3 because of his price, 4,300. He rewarded me by hitting 3 times that with 13 points. It's the exact same formula again this week. If Raymond's out, I think this game is one of the more high-scoring shootout games. I think it is the highest-scoring game. The Lions don't have a lot of other options at wide receiver, something that the Bucs do a terrible job of covering. They're 24th on DK and points allowed to wide receivers. Raymond was injured early in the Vikings game, like first quarter. In that basically 7 quarters since the injury, Reynolds has 14 targets, 10 receptions. In each game, he's had 7 targets, 5 receptions. On the season, Reynolds has 5 double-digit games on DK, add another 3 with 9 points or more. If he gets me 9 points at 3,700, I'm very happy. If he gets me 12 or more, I'm ecstatic. And again, this Bucs defense, they give up plays. We saw it last week. I would have loved to have seen what Philly could have done if A.J. Brown was available in that game, and it wasn't just Devontae Smith because we saw him just torch him. And again, if you are the opposing defense, who are you trying to take away? You're trying to, and I'm not saying you're going to be able to, but you're going to try to take away St. Brown. You're going to try to take away Laporta, who still doesn't look 100%, but those are going to be the top 2 guys. That leaves a lot of room for Reynolds. That's why he had 5 catches for 80 yards last week. I think he is definitely worth consideration at 3,700.
Yeah, and then I think the 2 guys that I would consider throwing darts at on the off chance that we do see, a healthy Lions receiving core, we see a healthy Bills receiving core. I'd be looking at Trey Palmer, who obviously he only caught 1 pass last week. Is a 56-yard touchdown. That's helpful.
But if he says that he wakes up angry, Joe.
If he wakes up angry, that's right. You gotta watch out.
Y'all think I'm kidding? Check his social media. His last now 6 games that he has tweeted the morning of a game, I woke up angry. He has scored a touchdown. You can't make this shit up. I text Joe and the guys on ESPN Northwest Florida saying my favorite prop tonight, Trey Palmer to score a touchdown, anytime touchdown, because he woke up angry. You didn't laugh at me. They laughed at me. He did it again. I don't understand, but I mean, just patterns happen for whatever reason. So if he wakes up angry,
100%. If he wakes up angry, change it. He's our number 1 play at wide receiver.
Exactly.
And then the other guy would just be Jameson Williams, just because I know it hasn't happened a lot yet, but that guy's a 1 play. You got a touchdown that's 60 yards, and he's paid for himself at 3,600. So yeah, I'm with you. I think it's Shakir. I think it's Reynolds, assuming that they are in a spot to play, 70, 80% of the snaps. But if that changes, then I think you can throw a dart on one of those 2 guys. Because again, I think that Tampa Bay Detroit game is one of the games I'm targeting.
All right, tight ends. Then we'll get out of here. I'm sorry, I know we're an hour and 20 minutes in, but we love this.
We're going deep.
I'll go ahead and tell you this is going to sound crazy again because, I have George Kittle on my list. He's 5th. Mm-hmm. The reason being, I keep saying it, I want to have 3 of the 4 guys of Evans, St. Brown, Collins, CMC. I feel like that has got to be part of my lineup. In order to do that, I've got to save money at tight end, and that's kind of why these are the options in this order. But I'm starting with K-Dot and 3,500. The big thing of him being number 1 again is just his price. He's the cheapest starting tight end available. The rest of them, they may technically be the starter, but they share snaps. Otten plays as much as any tight end in football. He runs routes on as high of a percentage as any tight end in football. We know he's coming off a monster game, 8 passes for 89 yards. This Lions team, I know they're ranked like 17th versus tight ends on DK, but very quietly, tight ends have caught 5+ passes in 6 of the last 7 games. Now, that did not happen last week, but part of that was because they blew out the knee of our boy, what's his name for the Rams? What is his name? Why am I blanking on it? He's one of your favorite plays every week during the season.
Oh, my God.
Moron. Yeah. Well, anyway, it'll come to you. Don't worry about it, Joe.
Yeah.
I just look at it that, again, I think this is a game they're going to be throwing a lot. Obviously, we know that he's not a priority. It's not somebody they're going to be stopping, but trying to basically, we got to stop Cade Otton. But I love the fact that he's being targeted all of a sudden a lot. I mean, he's got 24 targets his last 3 games. I know he had 11 last week, but that means he had 13 the 2 previous. 3,500, all we're asking for, again, 10.5 points, and that's a win. That is 3 times this price that you look for in cash. I think you can do a lot worse because, even Kincaid, likely these other guys, there's some serious questions, right? Like, especially if Andrews plays with Kincaid, you have to deal with Knox, who caught a touchdown last week. I'm just saying Otton's going to be out there. He's going to be running routes. He's going to be catching passes, 3,500. I'm kind of surprised he's that cheap coming off a big game. Maybe I'm the moron or the fool for taking him because there's no way he probably will match what he did last week, but he does half of that. He catches 4 passes for 40 yards. It's not going to kill me. Throwing a touchdown, we're golden.
Yeah, Cade Otton was, I think, my most successful guy I actually put in at tight end last week. Because, again, 11 targets, 8 receptions. We love to see it. I have him down at 3rd. But, yeah, I think when you're trying to go as cheap as you possibly can, which was, a big part of your argument here, is if we're trying to fit in all these guys. I've thought about this more individually. If you are trying to, again, fit in more of, those super high-priced guys, then, yeah, I think there's an argument that Cade Otton is number 1. I have him 3. I am going with George Kittle at number 1. Again, you never know who to bet on outside of McCaffrey, but I got to have a pass catcher, and having not gone with either wide receiver, and then Kittle being in a matchup against the Green Bay defense that has not been awesome against tight ends, I feel good. Kittle, let's not forget, 5 games of 20-plus points, which, there aren't, obviously,
22-plus points. Don't
22-plus points. Yeah. Where, Travis Kelce this year, 3 games of 22-plus points. So, and you're getting him for $800 less. Obviously, yeah, there's more competition. George Kittle has more, 4 or 5 point games than Travis Kelce has. But Travis Kelce is also facing, the 4th defense on DK against tight ends. It just takes one glance to see that not the defense that our boy George Kittle is up against. Green Bay has struggled against tight ends. Again, this is also the defense that I think is clearly the worst defense overall among the ones that are left. Now, the Packers this year, 54 yards per game, 2 tight ends. That's bottom, I think, 10 in the league. 0.56 touchdowns per game. That is counting the playoffs. Only the Denver Broncos give up more touchdowns per game to tight ends than the Green Bay Packers. And let us not forget who was the highest scoring tight end last week. Jake Ferguson, 3 touchdowns. 100 yards total allowed to the Dallas tight ends.
10 catches, too. 10 catches for 93 yards.
10 of their 11. They also gave up 1 more to the backup tight end. So 10 of their 11 catches, 3 touchdowns. Yeah, I think this very reasonable chance. This is George Kittle's 6th 20-point game of the season. And because of the price point and the fact that, again, hard hard to judge. The fact that he's so much cheaper than Debo and Ayuk, $2,500 cheaper than Debo, $1,700 cheaper than Ayuk. I think you can pair Purdy with Christian McCaffrey, but if you're trying to pair him with an actual true receiving option, far and away from me, Kittle is the choice.
You could pair the three of them together, and
I think you could.
Think about some cash games because Kittle at 5,200. Maybe say you play him at flat, you're still going to have to probably play one.
You could pair him with Cade Otton. Again, the thing that we have come around to this season is doing the double tight end sometimes. That's 8,700 for two guys. That sets you up pretty nice. Just throw in, a Shakir at one of your wide receiver spots, and you're going to have room to do some stuff. So,
I like it. I have him fifth because of the price again, because I think he's just, expensive. I'm kind of punting on tight ends. I might put him in a flex though. Like that's definitely you're really making me think about, especially with the argument you made for Brock. I want to just add on real quickly that you said the Ferguson game. I think even more importantly, what shows how bad this team is versus tight ends. Johnny Munt. Remember when I called that, Joe? You were like, who the fudge is Johnny Munt?
I do remember.
4 catches for 39 yards and a touchdown. The Panthers tight ends, which go ahead, try to name them. I know I can't.
I cannot, no.
They combined 3 weeks ago for 7 catches for 80 yards versus his defense. They're real bad versus tight ends, like really bad. And I think that you really are. He may end up being my flex. The second tight end I have is Dalton Kincaid, 4,800. Again, this is very dependent on Gabe Davis missing. Like I need Gabe Davis out of the game for him to be above some of these guys that I have, including like George Kittle. Like I would probably bump Kincaid if Davis comes back all the way to 5th. He's got double digit in 3 straight games on DK, almost 15 points per game in that span. Obviously that is 3 times his salary, 21 targets, 14 receptions, 238 yards those 3 games. But the big thing for me, the 2 games without Gabe Davis, 14 targets, 10 receptions, and Kansas City has a good pass rush. Good pass rush means that you're not going to be able to just chunk it down the field. Dalton Kincaid is basically their slot wide receiver. That's the way they use him. If you watch it, even his touchdown last week was really a play that was kind of a short throw, and he goes up. Yeah, I agree with you, Josh. Let's hope Gabe Davis plays. Of course, I really do like the Shakir play, so I don't know. It's 50-50 for me. But I have Kincaid second. Again, that's only if, Davis is out. And I do think that there may be value in cash game lineups of going Allen, Kincaid, Shakir if he ends up missing. That's Gabe Davis. Who you got at number 2, Joe?
I mean, mine is also dependent on – I wouldn't say this guy's unplayable, but he's not my number 2 if Mark Andrews suits up. And it's Isaiah Likely at 47.
He's my 3rd.
Yeah, where he's probably still in my top 5, honestly, because I don't see Andrews being healthy enough to be playing, 70, 80% of the snaps. And I also think, if it wasn't clear before, they know now how good Isaiah Likely is.
Should have listened to me last year, Joe. I tried to tell him.
I know. We liked him coming out. And
Coastal Carolina.
I believe it was Coastal Carolina.
No, that's where he went. I know for a fact because that's where Ryan went to school. So,
but last 5 weeks, again, including the Pittsburgh game, 5 touchdowns. Now, not always huge numbers, only 2 targets against Pittsburgh, but he is clearly a red zone priority for this team. When they get down close, this is the guy Lamar is looking to more than anyone. And 3 of those games were 18 points, which, listen, we're getting to the point where, there's not a lot of options. You're need to have the guys.
The lead, Joe. Who are they playing this week?
They are playing our good friends, the Houston Texans, who last week, hopefully, you were watching us last week. We were all in on Njoku last week. In large part, in part because he was just playing insane with Joe Flacco. But playing the Houston Texans, who... It wasn't all to Njoku, but last week, 11 receptions to tight ends for 158 yards on 17 targets.
Heading
This
in
team
regular season, they gave up
feeder
over
system for tight ends.
9 targets and 6.5 receptions per. We have picked on them with success all year. You know, Josh was just talking about hope Gabe Davis plays. I hope to God Mark Andrews doesn't play, because then Isaiah Likely is probably in every single lineup for me.
Yeah, when you factor in last week, the Texans on a per game basis giving up more receptions than anyone else to tight ends, giving up more yards to anyone else in tight ends. Now they have not actually given up a huge number of touchdowns. But again, that's the thing.
This isn't FanDuel. We don't care.
Right, and it's also been the thing that's been consistently already happening with Likely. The things we haven't always gotten are the big yardage, the big receptions. So if you're telling me great chance we get that, and then he's still the top guy in the red zone in this passing game, which again, Texans a little weaker in the very short yardage, but in general, a really good run defense. So maybe you're looking to pass a little more than normal. Isaiah Likely's the guy. So, I mean, he's right there. It's only the fact that it's only $500 difference with Kittle. But if Andrews is out, it's 1A, 1B for me. So if I really need to save that money, then maybe I'm going Likely. And then if Andrews is suiting up, he's third or fourth. Like he's still a guy who's going to be in a bunch of my lineups no matter what.
Yeah, what Harbaugh said today makes it hard for me to believe that. Like, I think Andrews could end up suiting up. I don't see him playing a lot of snaps. And
no,
that's actually a win-win, because if he does that, that means Likely will be low owned, and I think there's some real value.
Real quick, just because I forgot to mention this on George Kittle. For those of you who do RPFF fans, again, the tight end advantage over what they perceive as his most likely guy in coverage, 51%. No other tight end this week is above 10%.
Wow.
So, again, obviously, a lot of mouths to feed. That's, again, always the biggest worry when you're playing a San Francisco guy. But to me, yeah, if you're playing a non-McCaffrey skill guy, I'm all in on Kittle.
I'm going to do a deep dive in the next day, Joe, finding out what defenses they've played that have been middle of the road in zone and man. And, man, if Kittle's just had like 1 or 2 good games in that.
Right, that's enough.
I'm all in on him. Luke Musgrave is my 4th tight end, again, because of his price, $3,600, just a big play waiting to happen. It's really remarkable. This season, now, obviously, he's missed time due to injury, but he's only had 49 targets all year. He's turned it into 37 receptions for 404 yards. That's almost 11 yards per reception. That's a lot for a tight end. He scored 7 or more points in 7 of 12 games that he's played this season, 8.4 or more in 3 of his last 5 with 14 plus. And 2 of them, he had a good game last week playing 15 snaps, which was his first back. I think that they're going to continue to ramp him up. This is actually one of the few areas that the San Francisco defense is not elite. And I kind of really like the upside of Luke Musgrave, especially at 3,600, because, again, if he scores 4 to 5 points, I mean, it sucks, but it's not going to kill you at 3,600. And I think he is the kind of guy, because he's just, again, averaging over 11 yards per catch, and he's had some big scoring games. It would not surprise me if all he had 15, 20 points. And, man, you get that at 3,600. Now we're really talking.
Yeah, I mean, Musgrave, that was my guy from the Senior Bowl. Again,
yeah, it was.
Broke 20 miles per hour.
It's ridiculous.
At the Senior Bowl, which
he's a big dude, too.
Is fast for anybody, but for a tight end is exceptional. My number 4 is Dalton Kincaid. Like you said, I think even in not necessarily the easiest matchup, he's with Gabe Davis out, he's the clear number 2 in this offense. And I'm not 100% that Davis comes back. It doesn't stay that way, because Kincaid is legitimately that good of a tight end. So he's my 4, and then my 5. I went the other way in Green Bay.
Oh, you went with Tucker.
Yeah, and again, I think everything you said is right. Like Musgrave is the more talented receiver. Granted, I don't think Tucker Kraft's bad, as he's proven in the
No,
weeks
not
that
at all.
Musgrave was out.
Both
But
rookies,
yeah,
which is just ridiculous.
Musgrave is the guy they're more likely to scheme something up. Again, that touchdown that he had, I don't know that I've seen a player ever be more wide open than Luke Musgrave was. Like
True.
there was pressure, and Love basically just punted it. Like the throw was essentially a punt. It had an insane airtime, and still no one could get there because he was that wide open.
Good job, Dan Quinn.
Yeah, Dan Quinn, not the much like Mike McCarthy, great coach in the regular season on defense. Get to the playoffs, it gets sketchier. But overall, the reason why I'm going Kraft over Musgrave, and I think it's super close. It's a coin flip.
Price.
It's price, and again, last week played 90% of the snaps.
Mm-hmm.
So Musgrave came back, and obviously at least 5% of the time they were both out there. Which that's what makes Green Bay so frustrating if you're trying to pair anyone with Jordan Love, but so difficult to actually defend. They've got 2 tight ends they might go throw to. They got 4 wide receivers. It's insane. If you're a Packers fan, please celebrate your management because those guys are doing a phenomenal job. 16
players born after the year 2000. That's ridiculous.
Yeah. Again, and also just a huge credit to the offensive coaching there. San Francisco and Green Bay are two of the youngest offenses in the NFL, and they're 2 of the best offenses in the NFL because their coaches are offensive geniuses. But yeah, Kraft, again, playing 90% of the snaps even when Musgrave came back. Obviously, I think that lowers a bit this week, but I don't think it just shoots all the way down. And yeah, he's cheaper. You're going to save $500 for the guy who I expect will play more snaps. That was enough for me, but again, I think those would be my 5 and 6. It's a coin flip.
Yeah, I agree with that. All right, we have in a smooth hour and 41 minutes.
That's right.
Gone through all of that. Real quickly before we get out of there, want to send a message to our boy Ryan Mulvey, who is host of the Inside Drive on ESPN Northwest Florida. Me and Joe are officially friends of the show. He is one of the best dudes in the world. Really scary moment on Wednesday where he had a seizure. Literally on air. They rushed him to the hospital. Unfortunately, he does have a tumor in his brain. Right now, everything I think looks good. He's going to have probably surgery next week. He's going to do the show tomorrow. Dude's a fucking rock star. But definitely a lot of, we'd appreciate, you're just thinking about him, thoughts and prayers. I'm a big believer in positive thinking and the power of prayer. And definitely Ryan needs it right now. Seriously, one of the best dudes in the world. And I say this even despite the fact that he's a 49ers fan. So nobody's perfect. But we love you, Ryan. I hope you get feeling better very soon. And I'm definitely going to call in tomorrow and mess with you because if you saw, he had the seizure, I think partly because he was wearing the Shitters Full hat, but it had the 49ers logo. From Christmas Vacation. I think that was really what brought on the seizure. I know they're going to say it's a tumor. I don't believe that. So it was an ugly hat. I love you though, Ryan. Joe, you got anything you want to say before we get out of here?
The only thing I'll say is my stay away defense this week, not the bottom defense, which is the Bucs, who I actually kind of like because, again, Todd Bowles is throwing blitzes. The Packers, don't do it. There's no reason to. I think the Bucs are a better matchup, even against Detroit in Detroit, where Detroit's been so good. I want nothing to do with the defense that is facing Kyle Shanahan.
Yeah, I think that's very fair. Last week, nobody was on the Texans. Actually, I think you did mention them, but most people were not on the Texans. Yeah, you actually were like, Keith, it's the Texans. But just to me this week, I really like the Bucs 2,500. To me, that's like it's basically you either say I'm all in, I'm going Ravens 3,500, or it's like screw it, I'm going to go 2,500, and just kind of the same thing as Flacco. Golf has been known to make mistakes, especially when blitzed, and that's all you need. That's what you said last week, right? Flacco had at least one turnover in each game, and I mean that's what we're looking for. God bless you, Joe. They ended up having 2 defensive touchdowns. I hope a lot of people listen to you, but. To me, that's really the 2 I'm looking at. You could talk me into the Chiefs. I think 2,900.
the Kansas City Buffalo team that you project to win, you could go with. I would lean Kansas City, even though I kind of think Buffalo wins, just because who's more likely to turn the ball over, Josh Allen or Patrick Mahomes? I think we know, as good as Josh Allen is, we know the answer to that question, and that's also the reason why, to me, the Bucs are my favorite play. Is I don't disagree that the Ravens are probably like just straight up that's the best defensive matchup. No one turned the ball over less than the Texans with C.J. Stroud.
That's very
so
true.
That's why, for me, I'm going to be running with a lot of Bucs, and it might go wrong. Detroit might light them up. I don't know. But Todd Bowles is a great game planner. He's one of those guys where I feel better about a Todd Bowles defense in the playoffs because in a 1 week anything can happen situation, that guy's going to throw you something you're not ready for.
Yeah, he makes really good adjustments that have to. So, all right. Sorry it took so long. This is what we do. We promise next week because there's only 4 teams.
Hopefully it'll be shorter.
We won't take an hour and 45 minutes. We truly appreciate each and every one of you. Be sure. Thank you so much, Josh. Thank you, Brad. I will definitely relay both of those to Ryan. Thank you for the kind comment there, Brad. We enjoy all of you guys. Be sure, again, I'm filling in for Dave Eddy, who he started his his off season a little early. So I will be filling in with Chris Robin. We're going to record tomorrow night. I believe it's going to be live. And then me and Joe will be on Fantasy and Frames, I believe at 9 o'clock. Is that what we said? 9:30. Where, again, if you watched last week, we will be actually building a DraftKings lineup, which is a lot of pressure. So wish us luck.
Hopefully it goes better this week. Hopefully I don't miss. Just give me the Jake Ferguson. Whoever it is, give me that guy.
Screw you,
him in my lineup.
I'll never forgive you. But for Keith and Joe, check out all the great work at Fantasy Six Pack. We'll see you guys soon. Have a great week. Win a lot of money.